Before we get to this week's episode of Business Over a Brew, let me tell you about my friends at Roberts Motors. You know, one of our favorite episodes here on the show was when we had a chance to sit down with Sam and John Roberts. If you haven't had a chance to watch that episode, go back and take a look at it. It's great to see the interaction between not only two business partners, but of course father and son as well. They really epitomize what a local business is all about. Number one, doing business the right way, giving back to the community. If you have a chance, you may not buy a car from there, but at least give them the opportunity. Shop robertsmotors.com. You get more at Roberts Motors Ford. More selection, more value. Each vehicle they sell comes with the Roberts Rewards Value Package, which includes oil changes for 2 years, loaner cars, car washes, and much more. Get more at Roberts Motors Ford. Check them out at robertsmotors.com. Now enjoy this week's episode of Business Over a Brew. Welcome to Business Over a Brew, the show where we talk business with some of the Riverbend's most interesting and influential business leaders, all while enjoying a nice brew from the Great Rivers Tap and Grill inside the Best Western Premier Hotel in Alton. Today we'll talk with Dennis Grubaugh, former owner and current editor of the Illinois Business Journal. Dennis will talk about his 40 years in the newspaper business and shed some light on what the future holds for the Riverbend business community. So let's get to it. It's the Business Over a Brew podcast from the Great Rivers Tap and Grill inside the Best Western Premier Hotel in Alton. Welcome to Business Over a Brew. I'm your host, Nick Darr. Pleased to be joined on this episode by Dennis Grubaugh, the editor and former owner of the Illinois Business Journal. Dennis, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here.
You've been around for a while. Tell us a little bit about your personal history.
Wow. You got time for 40 years worth of
I think we do.
Stories?
Battery's good, Joe? Okay, yeah, we're set. So.
I'm not sure exactly what I wanted to do when I went into college, but one of the things that I excelled at, almost by accident, when I went to SIU Edwardsville was journalism. I guess I had a knack for telling stories or writing or asking questions or all of the above, but I was always good at essay tests, too, where I could sort of BS my way through things. But it was something I did, got my degree, had an internship at the old Wood River Journal, believe it or not, a weekly newspaper, which has long since been put to rest. Worked my way up a little bit, joined the Suburban Journal newspaper chain, was there for 11 years, and did stints in Alton, Granite City. I was in Belleville for a short time, but it was always connected to the same chain of papers. So I got to know Mike Montgomery from the Telegraph pretty well, because at some point in the 80s, our company had purchased the Telegraph. So we were going to meetings together and that sort of thing. And at one juncture, Mike asked me if I wanted to come up and be the city editor of the newspaper. Actually asked me to be the news editor at that time, which was a slightly related position, but I said, yeah, I jumped at the chance. I had more than 11 years in the business at that point. It was all in weeklies, and I wanted to try something a little different. Went up there. I was like a weekend editor. I did a lot of night stints, covered a lot of business-related topics. I covered a lot of routine type of things, but I had mainly a desk-related position at that point. So I'd come up as a reporter and as an editor, probably did more editing than I did either one. But I never got totally away from the journalistic side of it. And I was there for a number of years through 2 or 3 different editors until the city editor left in 2001. And Jim Schrader, who was the publisher at the time, asked me if I would consider becoming the city editor, which it was the number 2 role in the newsroom, and purely in charge of all the editorial content, signing the reporters, coordinating the photographers, and that put me right smack in the middle of everything. I wanted to do that. I really did. And lo and behold, did it for about 13 years. Along the way, I covered a little bit of everything. Not as city editor. By that time, I was kind of desk-bound again, but I was right in the middle of planning what all appeared in the newspaper. Leading up to that juncture, I did a stint covering the courthouse, and At the time, it was the late 90s, and Alton had gone through a series of murders, so I got to sit through all of the murder trials that resulted from that. Some very interesting situations. The Richard Skelton case went through there, and I think they had, oh gosh, there was around a dozen people that were charged in that one, and other cases that were just as interesting, but it's hard to put your finger on anything that was more interesting than another, because it was all a very good time.
I think the two news stories that stick out in my mind, maybe more than any others, are the Paula Sims case and then the flood of '93. What was your role in those two?
I came in there after Paula was convicted in her second case, so I didn't really get in on the initial coverage of that. But I did cover some of the appeals-related stuff. So when she was coming back to Madison County for rehearings, I'd see her walking through the corridor, and I'd saunter on up there and try to get her to talk, and she was stone-faced then and never did really open up to many people. She eventually did cooperate in the writing of a book, but she was an interesting character, let me put it that way. And the flood of '93 was also an interesting time, too. I was part of the team of people that basically worked on getting the coverage completed. Boy, I tell you what, when it came right down to it, we didn't know what we were going to be doing from one day to the next, and we could have applied every single person on the staff to that role. I actually probably played more of a role in later floods, because at that point I was kind of a junior member of the desk. So people like Walt Sharp, Mike Montgomery, Sanford Schmidt, those kind of guys, John Babin, they really led the effort on the coverage of the early floods. By the time some of the later '90s floods came around, and then some of the ones subsequent to that, then I had more of an active role in planning. By that time, we really knew what we were doing, because we almost could anticipate what the coverage was going to be days in advance.
Tell us about the end, leaving the Telegraph. How did that transpire?
That was 2013. At that juncture, I was getting unhappy with the fact that, we'd have reporters leave, we couldn't fill their roles, and I was frustrated as an editor, because you've got a job to do and nobody there to do it, and I just said I want to try something a little different. Well, by that point, Kerry Smith, who was the original founder of the Illinois Business Journal, and I had lunch one day up at Prince of Ellie's restaurant. And I got to telling her a little bit. She had been a former reporter for me. I was part of the team that brought her aboard as a reporter for the Telegraph. In the late '90s, shortly after that, she left to found the newspaper, the Illinois Business Journal, which was a first-time venture at a monthly business publication covering the River Bend and essentially Metro East.
Right.
We like to say that Carrie didn't have two nickels to rub together when she started the operation, but she made it a success. And along the way, she picked up a partner by the name of Al Artballs. Al and her made a real success of that operation for many years. But Carrie grew to the point where she was wanting to do some other things. And about the time that we had that famous lunch, I told her I was unhappy, and she said she was looking at some other avenues, and said maybe I needed to call Al, and I did. And before you know it, I'd signed up a deal with him, and we became partners in that operation, and stayed that way for the next 6 years, up until this past May. Al decided he was getting close to retirement, wanted to step aside, and we decided we would sell our newspaper. We did. The new owner asked me to stay on as the editor, and that's exactly what I'm doing now. Al's retired. I'm the editor of the Illinois Business Journal, now working for Better Newspapers, which is a chain of newspapers based out of St. Clair County, but mainly weeklies, some shoppers. Geographically, we represent, the Illinois Business Journal does, one of his bigger papers. And he's gotten, I think, now 22 or 3 papers altogether. Covers way up into Illinois and into mid-state Missouri.
The media business and journalism is an interesting one. It's changed so much, obviously, and you've seen a lot of those changes. But typically local media jobs are not the highest paying professions. They're okay, but you're not going to get rich typically doing them. But man, once you get bit by that bug, it kind of sticks with you the rest of your life.
I told my wife, God bless her, when we got married 40 years ago, about the same time I became a newspaperman, I said, don't expect to get rich. She didn't. So I've never broke that promise.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
However, being an owner of a newspaper puts you in the position of chasing after some of the revenue that's involved. As you know, at the radio station, advertising drives it all. And if you can round up some ad revenue, it can be quite profitable. And that worked out real well for me for several years. And then I was able to sell it, did well with that. So I can't really complain. I've set myself up now where I can literally retire in a few years, and I'll feel a whole lot better about my profession getting out than I did getting in from a revenue standpoint.
What do you think about just an overview of your opinion of journalism at the local level these days compared to 20 years ago, maybe?
My God, it's changed so much. Back in the day, if you look at old newspapers, they used to have neighborhood correspondents from every venue you could think of. The Telegraph would have somebody writing about Upper Alton and North Alton, downtown Alton, Midtown, Calhoun County, Jersey County, and they were not a whole lot of serious type material, but they were names, a lot of faces, and you could always count on knowing a little bit about what was going on almost everywhere. It changed when corporations started buying newspapers and started milking the profits and whittling down the staffs. And the strong point was probably post-Watergate, when journalism was really this romantic ideal. That's kind of what led me into it, was that sort of romance. And it sort of dwindled through the years, and then suddenly you've got the new media, the internet, social media, and those who don't adapt are destined to fail. So I adapted at every stage, and I've done things now that I never would have dreamt through the years. I was posting to Facebook today. I mean, that's nothing I even would have dreamt of doing. But I got a story out online this morning. I followed suit. I punched it up, put it on Facebook. I followed further suit, put it on Twitter. And I felt pretty good about all that.
Right,
because people were reading it on those various platforms.
It is interesting because there are so many different ways to get the information now, and that's not just radio and TV and print. There's a lot of other most of us have a device in our pocket that you can get the news on instantaneously.
I've got mine. I've got it on silent right now.
Yeah. So that's changed it a lot. I worry about just when I started in radio, I think the best thing that I ever did from a news standpoint was had to go out and cover city council meetings and school board meetings and things like that, and find a story. And
I started very humbly. One of the very first stories I ever wrote was an intern at the former Wood River Journal, and there was some localized flooding down on the river that was affecting some of the barge traffic. So the editor sent me down there to talk to some of the barge workers and whatnot about how it was, because they were having to take boats to get out to where they were at. They couldn't just do it from the shoreline anymore. They literally had to ferry out to their boats to do their jobs. So they took me out in a boat, and I got to talk to some of the people there, and came back, wrote the story, submitted it to the editor, and he thought it stunk. Well, he was right. It did stink. It was terrible. So I rewrote it, gave it back to him, and he took the second draft of it. I learned a valuable lesson. My prose is no more valuable than the next guy's.
Right. One of the first things Sam Stem and our news director, Mark Ellerbrock, told me when I started was you have to have thick skin, because the first story you write is going to be horrible, and we're going to rip it apart, and that's how you're going to get better.
Seek the truth and spare not the truth. That's always been my motto.
Right. What is your thought on so our area has undergone a lot of changes from a factory town and everybody having those types of industrial jobs to now certainly different. What do you think the identity of the Riverbend is?
Well, it's trying to remake itself into more of a tourist-related town, which, there's a lot of sense in that. The more that can be done to draw in people from the outside to continue to attract them at various levels, whether it's the nightlife downtown or the riverfront or the Argosy or the history, any of those sorts of things. If they take advantage of those in the right way, and it certainly looks like they're on the right direction now, it'll pay continuing dividends. They'll keep getting people here. They'll get them from farther away. It'll be more of a destination. That's what we want in this town. And Alton is uniquely situated. They really began working toward that even back in the 80s when people like Paul Lenz was the mayor and Jack Jacoby and Jack Helmkamp were pushing the riverfront development. So that they were on the right track there, and they had some stumbles, and it took a long time for it really to get built the way they wanted to. Now I think we've got a fantastic riverfront that's only going to get better as it goes. And that's just one of many things. But there's not many places in the United States where the river, as beautiful as it is, flows past it, a city, the way it does Alton, built on a hill and being able to overlook it. You can't beat it.
It's something I think we take for granted. But when you bring somebody in from out of town, I always get comments about what a beautiful area.
The river has been a two-edged sword for us
Sure.
in a lot of ways. There's been a lot of deaths attributed to it. I've covered more than one person who died. The fireworks explosions, wrote substantially about that. 3 guys died on a barge one year. I think it was 96, 97. I can't even remember the year, but we had the entire paper made up. I believe it was either a Friday night or a Saturday night. It was late, and I was in the back window at the Telegraph watching the riverfront show, and all of a sudden, all the stuff was just going crazy, and it looked like part of the show. And then somebody yelled, "That barge is blowing up." Well, that sure changed the rest of the evening,
Yeah.
and I probably wrote 5 or 6 stories about that through the years, and as it followed through the courts and the settlements that resulted from it. Wilma Bricker, the former teacher who drove her car into the river and was missing for 3 years until a catfisherman with a fancy sonar, happened to see her car down below the surface of the water. Found her 3 years almost to the day. Those are the kind of stories that people never forget. But like I said, that river, it's beautiful, but it's treacherous too.
Sure. Where do you see the future for the Illinois Business Journal in the next couple of years?
I see it as really good. We've got a brand new marketing guy who's really hustling on pushing the advertising side, and I've got a lot of flexibility to cover the kinds of things that I think will make neat stories. Geographically, we cover Madison, St. Clair, a little bit of Monroe County, all of Metro East essentially is what I call it. And I am constantly scurrying around talking to people hither and yon about development and trends. And last couple of weeks ago, I was in downtown Collinsville at the new Harold Brewery down there, and they had a very interesting meeting about how historic tax credits are being applied to development in this market. So I wrote about that. Things you might not see necessarily any place at all, but that's kind of our specialty, and we're going to keep on it.
You even had to do an interview with me not too long ago.
I did, yeah. The big Z in the news.
Right, yeah. For skeptics out there, and there are certainly those that would say, this tourism thing and the business, it's our area is, the future's not bright for it. What would you say to those?
Well, Brett Stawar is the head of the Tourism Bureau locally, is nothing short of a genius when it comes to enlisting people to get behind this effort. He's had a number of gatherings, prominent individuals get together, and that Tourism Bureau has started moving toward not just Alton and nearby towns, but also into Edwardsville, into Macoupin County, into Collinsville. He's becoming more regionally focused, and the brilliance of that is, of course, the whole idea of everybody working together toward one big goal. why didn't we do this years ago? It's probably because we had more selfish motives 30 and 40 years ago. We always had our little fiefdoms, and you know, it's kind of hard, you know, trying to do well by another town when you're working so hard to do well by yourself. But I tell you what, working together is so much better, so much smarter. It's going to yield big dividends.
Yeah, I think we saw a lot of that during the small business revolution when it came to town. You'd see all the mayors there. It wasn't just Mayor Walker. It was Joe Silkwood, Mike McCormick. It was, you know, they were all together. And I think there's a really spirit of cooperation, not only amongst politicians, but amongst other business owners, even competitors. I think there's a real spirit of a rising tide raises all boats.
I'm a big believer in that, and I almost use that very phrase. You know, if it benefits Alton, it's going to benefit Wood River. If it benefits Wood River, it's going to benefit Roxana, South Roxana. Everybody stands to gain from any new employer that comes along, and we've had several in the past couple of years. We've got more of a specialty now with these warehousing units and things going in down on the interstate and 111. But those may not be in the smack of the river bend, but people here work there.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end. Dennis, before we wrap up, where can people find the Illinois Business Journal?
It's delivered free to all of the non-resident households in Madison County. And in St. Clair County, and as far down as Waterloo and Monroe County. So if you have a business, or if you are a member of an organization or educational entity of some sort, you should be getting a copy of it right now. But if you don't, we're at IBJ Online, has all the stuff that I break every day on there, as well as ways to contact us. If you want to get copies, I'll be glad to get you copies.
Well, Dennis, thanks for coming on Business Over Brew. Thanks for helping to tell the story of the Riverbend and the Metro East over the last 40 years. Appreciate it.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you.